Hi guys, Mike with Fights with Friends, and a lot of you have probably heard recently that Eddie Alvarez signed a new deal. UFC and Bellator were talking amongst each other. UFC had what Eddie Alvarez said was a very fair deal. A great deal on the table. He said that he did want to explore other options. Now, in my mind, I really thought that he was going to sign with the UFC the entire time. And I'll tell you why. A lot of people maybe forget, but in 2013, after Eddie Alvarez beat Michael Chandler, he was on a 3-fight win streak in Bellator, and the UFC wanted him. The UFC wanted him bad. And there was a stipulation in his contract where he had one of these fight contracts where it was like, after so many fights, if another organization offers you more money, then you can get out of the deal. So they ended up going to court, and Bellator said, well, we matched the deal. In the contract, it says we have the right to match the deal. Cash-wise, we match the deal. Eddie Alvarez came out with the help of the UFC and said, hey, you guys don't have pay-per-view. You guys, there's no chance that I'm going to get pay-per-view points because there's no pay-per-views. Bellator, I believe, had one pay-per-view, and they were acting like they were going to have a lot more. Eventually, of course, they ended up losing Eddie Alvarez, who was very valuable at the time. He's coming off a victory, 3-fight win streak of Shinya Aoki, Patricky Pitbull Freire, and Michael Chandler. Their golden boy at Bellator 106. So he comes into the UFC, loses his first fight to Donald Cerrone by decision. No shame in losing to Donald Cerrone. The guy, he's great. He's a great fighter. But then he goes on a tear. He shows, his ability. Maybe the lights got to him a little bit the first time. I'm not sure. In the UFC. But he goes on a tear, beats Gilbert Melendez, Anthony Pettis. When Anthony Pettis, this is in 2016, this is a great Anthony Pettis on the Dillashaw Cruz card. Then he knocks out Rafael dos Anjos at UFC Fight Night 90. 349 in the first round. And he's on top of the world. I mean, he's champion in the most stacked division in all of MMA. Of course, he freezes in the moment against Conor McGregor, loses that fight, gets knocked down in the second round, goes on, did get a good victory, impressive victory over Justin Gaethje with knees right before the end of the third round. But coming into this contract, he was pretty valuable. The UFC still wanted him, and he said himself he liked the UFC's deal. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we start to hear things about ONE FC. Now, of course, ONE FC has been teaming with Rich Franklin, has been over there helping them. He's been helping with their rules to their weight cuts and a lot of other things over there to try to get them able to compete with the rest of the world. And they're based out of Singapore. It's a great tax haven. You can pay fighters more, and they not have to worry about paying the taxes on it, but you don't get the notoriety, so it's a little harder to build yourself. All of a sudden, Eddie Alvarez comes out and says he's got an 8-figure deal with ONE FC. He says, this is what I was looking for when I was talking to the UFC. 8 figures, so that means at least $10 million. Now, there might be some of you out there saying, oh, well, Conor McGregor gets that for one fight and more. Khabib Nurmagomedov just got $2 million for his last fight against Conor. Those are anomalies. For one thing, he would have to win the championship, and basically, he would have to get a fight against Conor. If you're not the heavyweight champion or a very popular lightweight champion, and you're not Conor McGregor or fighting Conor McGregor, you're not making $1 million in a fight, and probably nowhere near it. He was sitting on a contract, I think, of 200 show, 200 win. And it was less than that before he won the championship. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I know it was less than that before he won the belt. He's a guy that's been around a long time. And he said they actually offered him part ownership. He didn't say exactly how much he was getting to fight, but he said, when I left the table at the UFC, and this is to quote him, and I said I wanted to go and explore, this is the deal I had in mind. One made me a partner in their promotion. It was more of a partnership than, hey, come on as a fighter. Here's your money to fight. And that's it. They made me a true partner. It's a package deal. It's nothing like a normal MMA contract. They fully committed to me, and we are fully committing back. This could end up being an incredible idea for ONE FC. If you compare MMA, and business minds have tried to do this, but you have to have both. You have to have the love of MMA, and you have to know MMA, and you have to have a business mind. So many promotions, almost all promotions, have failed. Strikeforce got bought out by UFC, but they were paying too much for some of the fighters they were getting. I don't know how many of you remember Elite XC. Kimbo Slice fought for it. They got on CBS. They have, and I believe this still stands, the record, at least in the United States, for most viewers for an MMA fight. Over 10 million people watched Kimbo Slice fight Seth Petrozelli, and unfortunately get knocked out in 21 seconds. Not to be expected. Petrozelli was a last-second replacement for Ken Shamrock, of course. But my point being, just because you have great fighters, you have a lot of eyeballs on it, it's not easy to make money in MMA. You have to build a bit of a foundation. So ONE FC, they built the foundation, especially in the United States. Now you had Elite XC, who went under. You had Affliction, who I've had the former CFO of Affliction on here, Tom Atencio, and he'll talk to you and tell you we paid fighters too much money. You see, that's what it was. They did start to get names right away. They got Andre Arlovsky immediately to fight Fedor in his prime. They got Tim Sylvia, same thing. And they offered him millions of dollars when the UFC was paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Tom Atencio at the time was trying to tell these guys, hey, you're paying too much money. But in their mind, they were getting the best fighters. They were putting on the best fights. So that's all that mattered. Well, you can run out of money. There is a reason. There is a method to the madness of the UFC about how they got as big as they are. And it took a long time. And they didn't obviously pay very well at the beginning. A lot of people think that they don't pay very well. And for some fighters, that might be true. Well, ONE FC, with this partnership, and don't lose me here. Don't lose me here, because I am going somewhere with this. This partnership, it's very similar to what you would give an executive in a company. It's a performance-based bonus, per se. But when you give part ownership, this is like a stock option. You give a major incentive to your executive, to your player, whoever it is. And Eddie Alvarez is a very, very positive and influential guy in and out of MMA. He is a super intelligent guy, and he's got a business mind. If you don't know much about Eddie Alvarez, besides outside of the cage, this guy's no dummy. And ONE FC's no dummy. They have this tax haven over in Singapore, where I guarantee Eddie Alvarez is very unlikely to pay more than 5% tax on that money, if he even pays 5%. Singapore is a tax haven. So that makes the deal worth more right out of the gate. And that makes Singapore an area that, if you build the foundation, which they've been spending a few years doing now, and you get the fighters, you have a shot at least a shot at competing with the bigger guys, UFC and especially Bellator. Now, you say they're in a different time zone, all these other things. A lot of these things are true. But don't be surprised if we see more signings coming out of ONE FC with guys with that kind of incentive. A guy like Eddie Alvarez, guys that come over that are huge in MMA, if they are very passionate about a place they go to and they take the same work ethic as they do in MMA into the business world, into the entertainment world, you see it in Brendan Schaub. I'm not the biggest Brendan Schaub fan, but you look at his comedy and his commentating, and he went to another level very quickly. And a lot of people were actually really upset with Joe Rogan. Some of these guys, comedians, were like, hey, he's just getting here because of this amount of time. It takes years and years for these sets. And he says, yeah, it takes years and years for you to get to the same place because you're lazy. That's what he told him. He says, you don't understand the work ethic that these guys have. And Eddie Alvarez has a work ethic second to none when it comes to promoting, when it comes to help building this thing, and when it comes to bringing other fighters over. I'm going to leave you with this quote from Eddie Alvarez recently from the Ariel Helwani show. He said, I'm not the last large signing in the next month or so. There will be a shift, a massive shift in power towards one championship. With that being said, I look forward to seeing Eddie Alvarez start his career in ONE FC. If you're waiting to see him into ONE FC, they're targeting his first fight for early 2019. Who could be the next guy going? I don't know. I'd like to know what your guys' thoughts are on this. I could see Nate Diaz jumping ship. A guy that I could really see jumping ship right now, though, is Dustin Poirier. And I don't know if Eddie wants that fight or not to avenge that loss. He did get knocked out from Dustin Poirier. But Dustin Poirier is not a happy fighter right now after all those negotiations for UFC 230 with Nate Diaz. He said it was very, very cumbersome, and he said it was actually a very horrible experience, to quote him. So a lot of things going on out there, but I want to know what you guys think. Is ONE FC, could they at least move into number 2, maybe ahead of Bellator, especially if they were to sign on with the Zone signing all these major organizations, $9.99 a month. They're obliterating the pay-per-view model, which I am a huge fan of getting rid of that model. You thought I was going to say I was a huge fan of that model. You guys know I hate that model. This is great for MMA. I believe anytime there's competition, it's great for MMA. But this is how ONE FC is different than Elite XC and Affliction and all these places that overspend. Is for one thing, they have the tax haven in Singapore. For another thing, they're basically an employee-owned company, giving ownerships to the employees, giving them motivations. This is the same kind of stock options that these CEOs get, and this is huge for MMA. Let me know what you think down there in the comments. Hit that like button. If you're new here, please subscribe. As always, I love you, I respect you, and I'll see your fine asses later.